We worked for 23 years, and guess why you guys went to slavery? Because it was so extreme for a long time.
Oh my God, you need to shut up, girl.
Dude, they went to slavery because they couldn't shut up. No, they owed so much money, they were enslaved.
I'm sorry, I should shut up.
That's the truth.
Shut up.
You asshole. That's the truth. You guys did it so bad to white families, and you went into slavery. You're stupid, dude. No, you are dumb as f***. You're dumb as This lady has either a white personality and whites, and she's black. Only people that do that are actually black. This woman had to be black before she has a white person in. That's the truth. Fucking sickening. Sickening pieces of you're
A likely Jillian Michaels fan made an appearance on what looks like the CTA and tried making some points, but really airballed the entire game.
You have to have a black person in or white person in to look that white. And you're probably a black person that weighs 500 pounds. That's the truth. No.
I'm a retired Rocky police officer.
I figured that.
Shut up.
No. You guys, do you know that you have a white person in to starve out to stay white and thin? You know you do. That's the truth. I'm getting off, and now tomorrow, none of you are getting up. None of you, because you starved my family out before. That's how I know this is
Another day go, boy. I'm sleepy.
Hey, everybody want to party now?
Incredible. On that first point,
This has been an installation there. Is gender testing fair in sports? Does that, and then it goes on to talk about how it's complex to do gender testing in sports. It's not complex, it's basic science. That's untrue. It's XX chromosome, XY chromosome. That's sports. Is it fair to have biological men competing against biological women in sports? No, but why is this in the Smithsonian? So it's been completely captured.
First of all, I don't.
And
think
it's totally partisan.
We don't. First of all, we don't have time to litigate all of this.
Of course we don't, because then you're going to lose the argument. If everything is racialized, just like you're trying to do to me now.
Excuse me.
It's like, I can't believe you're trying to suggest, that slavery is a good thing.
Just to be clear, you brought up race.
No,
this was a conversation about the arts, and you brought up race.
It isn't.
You brought up.
But the whole point of this is that the issue
you brought up slavery. And you brought up the question of whether you brought up the question of whether or not slavery in the United States is about race. The answer is
no, I
yes.
Didn't. I did not say
in the United States
don't
is
straw man
about
my argument
race.
because that's not what I said.
So what are you
brought
talking
up
about?
Slavery, and what I was talking about is that this isn't really about that. When you make every single exhibit about white imperialism when it isn't relevant at all, that is a problem. So when you're talking about Cubans leaving Cuba and you make it about white people bad, that's not accurate.
Can I just say, zooming
that's
out,
my point.
All right, we're going to move on from that.
let's not forget her appearance on CNN.
Weird because they're triggered because they feel an alliance with the slave masters and not the abolitionists. We are not talking about slavery too much. We do not need to protect white children and white adults from the realities of slavery. We need to be deep and clear about America's original sin. For the good of your daughter, get out of the gym for a second and read this.
Let's take the fewer than 2% of white people owned slaves at face value, though we know that number is technically incorrect. If we want to play the numbers game, the much more important measure is what percentage of Americans owned slaves? No, but what percentage of those empowered did? Before 1865, the end of slavery in the United States, 63% of U.S. presidents have been slave owners at some point in their lives. More than 1,800 members of Congress owned slaves, meaning between 1789 and 1819, more than half of the men elected to Congress each session were slave owners. What about the Supreme Court? 26 of this nation's first 30 Supreme Court justices were enslavers, and about half of all the Supreme Court justices before the Civil War were enslavers. So many Supreme Court justices were enslavers that if we added up all the Supreme Court justices coming all the way to this present court, 1 out of 4 of all Supreme Court justices in this nation's history were enslavers. All but one of the people on our cash currency engaged in African slavery. Look at the $1 bill, $2 bill, 10, 20, 50, 100. All these men engaged in slavery. It's weird that we didn't value all those non-slave holding white people enough to put them on our money. The majority of the most powerful men in this country, the men who made the federal laws, interpreted the laws, and enforced the laws, built their wealth on African slavery. And I assure you, that number says much more about the country we inhabit than that 2%. During the height of slavery, it was not the Northeast, Boston or New York, but the Mississippi River Valley in the Deep South that had more millionaires per capita than anywhere in the nation. And the Confederacy, had it succeeded at being a separate country, would have been the 4th richest nation in the world when the Civil War started. Enslaved people in the U.S. produced 7/8 of the world's cotton supply, and slave-grown cotton constituted 50% of all U.S. exports, making it the #1 export in America. And the North was completely intertwined in slavery, so much so that at the start of the Civil War, New York City actually considered seceding from the Union because the economy of the nation's trade capital was so heavily reliant on slavery. White enslavers financed their operations through New York banks, protected their enslaved property through New York insurance companies, and transported their slave-grown cotton on New York ships, flooding $200 million into New York's economy every year. Enslaved people built the famous wall that Wall Street is named after. Famous companies such as Lehman Brothers are rooted in slavery. The Lehman Brothers began as cotton brokers in Alabama before moving to New York to help establish the New York Stock Exchange. Brooks Brothers made not only fine suits, but slave cloth outfits to clothe the enslaved. Domino Sugar dominated based on slave-grown sugar. As a result, by some estimates, New York received 40% of all U.S. cotton revenue. They didn't have to own the slaves to profit greatly from slavery. Northern states may have outlawed slavery, but they continued to profit off of slavery and the slave trade. We learn about the marvels of the Industrial Revolution, but that revolution was made possible not just by technology, but by cheap slave-grown cotton. Rhode Island outlawed slavery in 1787, but built its economy on the slave trade. 60% of all ships in the U.S., slave ships, left Rhode Island, and they spawned an entire enterprise to support these slave traders, shipbuilders, sailors, carpenters, rope makers. James DeWitt, he was a Rhode Island slave trader, and when he died in 1837, he was the 2nd richest person in America. I could talk about while, quote unquote, only 2% of white people owned slaves, by the time of the Civil War, the United States, the land of the free, had the largest enslaved population in the world. That the value of those enslaved people, that human property, was greater than all of this nation's factories, railroads, and banks combined. In other words, the United States economy and political systems were built in significant part by slavery. This is simply undeniable. Without slavery, our nation would be unrecognizable to us.
Hey, I appreciate you watching. Now, if you can, please do become a channel member by going to youtube.com/tytsports and clicking the join button. If that's too much for you, you can just go to tyt.com/join to become a member. It helps all of us out here at the Young Turks and keeps our network afloat. In addition, you could follow me on my socials on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Appreciate the love. Have a great day.